Okay, in this video what I want to do is talk about some of the critiques of the ontological argument. So hopefully you've either reviewed the ontological argument and thought about it, or at least looked at the last video and decided you wanted to go to this one. Basically, remember, the ontological argument has the following structure. First of all, God is that being than which none greater can be conceived. Second, it is greater to exist than not to exist. Third, if I conceive of God as not existing, then I can conceive of a greater existing God. And finally, God exists. Now, this argument appears to be valid, but there are a couple of challenges that have been posed to the ontological argument that are important to bear in mind. First, we have a monk by the name of Gonilo, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing his name right, and fortunately he's not around to tell me I'm not, or unfortunately, maybe. Anyway, his argument against Descartes is that you could basically do the same thing with the perfect island. That is, the perfect island is that island than which none greater can be conceived or thought. It is better to exist than to not exist. If I can conceive of a perfect island that is non-existent, I can think of a better island that exists. Therefore, the perfect island has to exist. Now, admittedly, some of us may have been to Hawaii or other places and think we may have seen the perfect island, but I think we can all stipulate that the perfect island probably doesn't exist. Some places may be close, but they're not perfect. So, what do we make of this argument? Well, the rebuttal to this argument is essentially as follows. That when we talk about the perfect island, we're actually taking the adjective perfect and attaching it to island. So the idea of island doesn't include the idea of perfection. So essentially, what he's doing is joining together two words that don't necessarily have to be joined together, like blue banana, or yellow banana for that matter. But if we think of the definition of island, perfection is not part of the definition. Yet perfection is part of the definition of God. And so therefore, in other words, if we say perfect God, we're not really adding anything by adding the modifier perfect. And therefore, perfection is part of God's essence. So we're not making up a new term. All right, and just as having three angles equal to 180 degrees may not be part of how we look at a triangle. I mean, a triangle is just a figure that's got three corners. Similarly, existence is an idea that has to be attached to God because perfection is part of the essence of God. And so, by this rebuttal, Gonilo is just wrong in using the perfect island as a counterexample. Now, the next rebuttal is by our good friend Immanuel Kant. And this rebuttal is a little bit more powerful. Basically what Kant said is, and he didn't know Clinton, but Clinton at one point, Bill Clinton, when asked a question, said the answer depends on what the meaning of the word is. And everybody laughs and says, well, what does that mean? Well, think about this. If I say a unicorn is a one-horned animal, I'm not saying anything about whether unicorns exist or not, but if I say a unicorn is standing on my front lawn, then obviously a unicorn would have to exist to stand on the front lawn. The problem is, if we take one kind of is statement, which is a definition, and we confuse it with another kind of is statement, which is a statement of fact, then what we're doing is committing the fallacy of equivocation on the word is. Now, the way Kant put it is a definition is not a statement of fact. And so therefore, when we say something like a unicorn is a one-horned animal, we're not saying that a unicorn is anywhere. We're simply saying that if something is a unicorn, then it would be a one-horned animal. Okay, so a definition is more like a hypothetical statement. If something is a unicorn, something is a one-horned animal. All right, which says nothing about existence. Now, before I talk about where this is going, I also should say that in Kant's language, basically what he's saying is that existence cannot be part of a definition. the adding existing doesn't add anything to the word. Another way to think about this is think of a pizza, okay? A really good, maybe mushroom and sausage pizza, or mushroom and cheese pizza, or whatever kind of pizza it is you like. Now think of the pizza as existing. Notice that thinking of the pizza as existing doesn't change your mental image or thought of a pizza. And so for Kant, existence cannot be the predicate of a definition, essentially. So the idea is that if we define something, well, we're saying, if I say a dog is a mammal, by definition, I'm saying if something is a dog, then it's a mammal. If I say a dog is lying on my floor, then I'm saying that there's an existing dog that is on my floor. And so those are two different kinds of statements. So saying that God is that being than which none greater can be conceived is basically saying if something is God, then it is that being than which none greater can be conceived. So let's look at this argument as Kant would restate it. So, sorry about the graphic here. If there is a God, God is that being than which none greater can be conceived. Okay, that's how a definition works. Okay, if something is God, then it would be that being than which none greater can be conceived. It is greater to exist than not to exist, so we keep the second premise. If I conceive of a God as not existing, then I can conceive of a greater existing God. Therefore, if there is a God, God exists. Okay, so in other words, we take the same structure, but we say, look, a definition is an if-then statement. If something is God, then it would be that being than which none greater can be conceived. And what we get is a conclusion that says, if there is a God, God exists, which is, in logical terms, a tautology. It's something that's always true. If there is a God, God would exist. If there's a unicorn, unicorn exists. So in the end, according to Kant, the ontological argument is simply a tautology. It doesn't prove anything. It just says that if there is the greatest possible being, that being would have to exist, which is true of anything. So in the end, for Kant, the ontological argument is not convincing. All right, so we've looked at a number of different ways of looking at the ontological argument. There does seem to be something powerful about the idea that the thought of, or the idea of God is different from other ideas, because God is something beyond our experience. But in the end, at least according to Immanuel Kant and others, it is not convincing because it ultimately breaks down into a logical tautology, something that is true simply by definition. All right, and that is it on the ontological argument. I hope these two videos have helped you understand the ontological argument, at least to the degree that you can explain it and analyze it.